A humble farmer walked into Big Shaq's tractor factory to earn an honest day's work. They locked the gates. They erased the footage. Thought no one would notice. But Big Shaq was watching. And now, truth's about to hit harder than steel. This ain't just a factory anymore. It's a battlefield. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. They called him Big Shaq on billboards, in sneaker ads, even in late-night talk show punchlines. The name carried a mythic weight. But down in rural Georgia, where the sun rose over rust-orange fields and the air still smelled like cut pine and diesel, Shaquille O'Neal was just Shaq. No titles, no spotlights, just a man who wore his past like a denim jacket, broken in, patched with time, and still warm around the edges. The factory sat low on the land, a sprawl of corrugated steel, glass, and memory. O'Neal Agricultural and Steel was etched into a time-worn arch above the main gate, flanked by the American flag and the Georgia state banner, both faded, both firm. Inside those walls, it wasn't about basketball or money. It was about torque, grit, quiet mornings where calloused hands turned bolts before sunrise and radios played old blues out of busted intercoms. Shaq didn't run it from some distant office tower. He was there, boots on concrete, every morning at 6 a.m., greeting folks by name, handing out coffee, leaning in to check welding joints like they were works of art. Shaq believed in machines. Not just the kind you built from parts, but the kind you built from people. You give folks purpose. You watch them come back to life. That was the idea. His daddy, Army man, used to say, "Son, you build character like you build a bridge, steel and sweat." Shaq took that to heart. When he opened the factory 5 years back, he hired vets, ex-cons, dropout welders, single moms, and every soul who had been passed over, counted out, or told they were too broken. Because he'd been there too. Behind the $1 million smile and the towering fame, he remembered what it felt like to be dismissed. But even steel sweats under pressure. Lately, something in the air had shifted. It wasn't loud. Racism rarely was. It crept in like engine oil on a white shirt. Quiet, slow, staining deep. Shaq had noticed it in the way the break room grew quieter when certain men walked in the narrowed eyes during staff meetings, in the stack of anonymous complaints that suddenly landed on HR's desk, all with that same coded language. Not a team player seems out place. Attitude problem. The names on those slips, familiar. Folks who'd worked their asses off. Folks who looked like Shaq. He didn't talk about it. Not yet. But he was watching. That Tuesday morning, the sun cracked over the horizon like an egg, bleeding orange over the gravel lot. Shaq stepped out of his matte black pickup, thermos in hand, boots hitting the ground like slow thunder. The security guard at the gate, young kid named Bryant, gave him a tight nod. "Morning, boss." Shaq nodded back. "You smell that?" Bryant sniffed. "Smoke?" "No," Shaq said, his voice low. Change. Inside, the day began like any other. Steel arms lifted engine blocks. Sparks danced from welders' hands. Forklifts beeped their way through narrow aisles. But beneath the clatter there was tension. Not shouted, not spoken, just a hum, a buzz of unease like static on an old radio dial. Shaq made his rounds. He stopped at the assembly bay, where Deshaun D. Rucker and Wiley Greer were rigging the new XL track model for a stress test. D., wiry and fast-moving, gave a nod. "Mornin', big man." Shaq grinned. "Y'all don't break it this time." Wiley, stocky and pale with red hands from decades of work, laughed, but not with his eyes. Something flickered there, tightness, restraint. Shaq noticed. He kept walking. By mid-morning he was in his office, a modest space with photos of his mama, a cracked leather couch, and a wall full of handwritten thank you letters from employees and their families. The newest one was from Jonas Creed, a recent hire, a widower, soft-spoken, with a drawl so slow it made clocks impatient. Jonas had written to say thank you, said he hadn't felt seen in years until Shaq gave him that job. Shaq kept that letter closer than the rest. A knock broke his focus. It was Rochelle, head of HR. Sharp, efficient, always carrying a clipboard like it was armor. She didn't sit. "There's been an incident," she said. Shaq raised a brow. "Minor," she added quickly. "Misfiled paperwork. Someone accusing Jonas of skipping a safety drill. Not a big deal. Just protocol." Shaq held her gaze. You ever known Jonas to skip anything? Rochelle hesitated, lips thin. No. Then why the file? Came in anonymous. Shaq nodded once. She left. He didn't move. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a pen. Not to write, just to hold. He stared at the wall for a long minute. The gears in his head turned slower than most, but once they moved, they didn't stop. That night, after everyone clocked out, Shaq walked the factory alone. He checked the lockers. Not the contents, just the locks. Some were scratched. Jonas's had been tampered with. That confirmed it. He checked the logbook. 2 names signed in late the day of the drill. Tanner Rise and Clay Rowden. Both new. Both loud. Both not shy about voicing what kind of men they preferred working with. Shaq didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, he walked out to the edge of the test fields, where the tractors were lined like soldiers waiting for orders. The sky had gone deep purple. Crickets chirped. Shaq stood still, like a statue cut from dusk. His thoughts were heavy, not angry, just calculating. He remembered something his mama once told him. Watch who flinches when the truth walks in the room. That's what he was doing now. Watching, waiting, listening for the flinch. He looked back at the factory. His creation, his refuge, but even sanctuaries had shadows. And now someone was trying to poison the soil he'd worked so hard to make clean. He wouldn't let it rot. Not without a fight. But it wouldn't be fists. Wouldn't be shouting. That wasn't Shaq's way. It would be slow. Strategic. Iron hard. Like the machines he built. Jonas Creed didn't say much when he first walked through the steel gates of O'Neill. Agricultural and steel. He just nodded to the guard, handed over his ID, and stepped through like a man walking into church. There was something in the way he moved, measured, deliberate, like each step carried years he hadn't asked for. His boots were caked in red dirt that no power washer could fix, and his flannel shirt had been mended in 2 places near the collar. He didn't look like a factory man. He looked like land earthbound, cracked, and seasoned. He came from a place called Hollow Creek, 37 miles down a 2-lane road that most GPS systems gave up on. For 25 years, he'd raised soybeans and corn, until the droughts came one after the other like slow punches. His wife passed during the second summer of dry heat. After that, the land grew silent. Jonas sold the last of his equipment for 1/3 of what it was worth, and came north looking for something he could still build with his hands. Shaq had read his resume and asked only one question. You know torque ratios? Jonas had nodded. Got the job the next morning. He never raised his voice, never rushed his steps, and never complained, not even when he was put on cleanup detail in the welding bay, where the heat made most men dizzy. He carried a metal lunchbox, with a handle that had been rewrapped in electrical tape, and he always sat at the edge of the break room table, not out of fear, just habit. Jonas wasn't shy, he was just used to being background. Most folks liked him. Mira in shipping always brought him an extra thermos of coffee. Leon, who handled the forklifts, nodded every time they passed in the yard. But not everyone was warm. There was Tanner Rise, loud and fast-talking with mirrored sunglasses even indoors, and Clay Rowden, who wore his father's old badge on his belt loop, like it gave him authority. They'd come in 3 months after Jonas, hired through a different pipeline, fast-track referrals from a contractor group in another county. They didn't talk to Jonas, but they talked about him plenty. The first time something shifted was on a Thursday morning, when Jonas pulled his old Chevy into the second-to-last spot in the lot. The spot had no name on it, no sign, just gravel and fading white lines. But it happened to sit right beside a gleaming black F-250, with chrome rims and dark-tinted windows. Tanner's truck. Jonas didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but parked anyway. By lunch there were whispers. Seen how close that bucket's sitting to Tanner's rig? He den it, or just disrespect it. He don't talk much, but he watches. Always watching. By the end of the shift, someone had carved a single line into Jonas's locker. Know your place. Not deep, not large, just enough to catch the light when the door opened. Jonas didn't report it. He just cleaned it off with sandpaper from his toolbox, closed the locker, and kept his head down. But Shaq noticed the change. Jonas's shoulders rode higher that week, his walk a little more guarded. It was the posture of a man who had learned, once again, that peace was something you had to defend with silence. 2 days later, someone started putting Jonas on back-to-back assignments in Bay 2, known among the workers as the crawl space, a tight fit beneath the engine rigs that left your neck aching and your lungs full of copper dust. He didn't argue, he just did the work, hour after hour. But trouble doesn't stay buried. It seeps up through the smallest cracks. One morning, Jonas opened his lunchbox and found it empty. Not missing, empty. Cleaned out. Plastic bag gone. Thermos lid unscrewed, but not spilled. Just gone. He stood there for a moment, looking at the clean metal inside, then closed it slowly, and returned it to his locker. Didn't say a word. Didn't ask anyone. Went the rest of the day without eating. It was Wiley who saw him toss the empty wrapper into the bin later. Wiley said nothing to him but told Mira, who told Rochelle. By the time it reached Shaq, it had lost most of its details, but not its weight. Shaq didn't confront Jonas, not direct. He just started walking through Bay 2 a little more often. A little slower, watching how certain men shifted when he came around. One afternoon, Jonas stayed late after the floor cleared. He was repairing a hydraulic panel that had been logged for inspection twice already. Something about the way it whined under pressure. Shaq found him under the mainline lift, one arm inside the compartment, the other holding a wrench the size of a child's leg. He was humming to himself, soft, something old. Shaq didn't interrupt, just stood nearby and waited. When Jonas finally pulled himself out from under the chassis, Shaq nodded once. "You eat today?" Jonas paused, then said, "Wasn't hungry." Shaq let that settle in the air, then walked off without another word. But he made a call that night, to Leon. Told him to double-check the locker logs. Told Mira to keep an extra eye on how lunch items moved. Told Rochelle to pull employee access timestamps. None of it was official. Not yet. Just Shaq watching. The next Monday, Jonas parked 2 spots over from Tanner's truck. Far enough not to draw talk, but close enough to remind folks he wasn't backing down. That was the thing about Jonas Creed. He didn't fight, didn't shout, didn't glare. He just refused to disappear. And in a place like that, for a man like him, that was its own kind of rebellion. Something was brewing beneath the factory's rhythm now. A quiet test of how long the humble could stay standing, while the loud tried to shake the ground beneath them. The whispers hadn't stopped, but neither had Jonas. And Shaq, from the far side of the yard, was watching it all. It always starts with something small. At O'Neill Agricultural and Steel, that morning, it was coffee. The break room had 2 pots, one for strong no-frills brew that the floor crew swore by, and one a little lighter, more corporate, as they called it. Jonas always poured from the first, took it black, and sat at the table closest to the window where he could see the fields beyond the test yard. He wasn't a man of many breaks, but when he sat with the stillness of someone who earned his pause. That morning he poured his coffee like always, took a seat like always, and took one sip before realizing it was full of salt. Not just a pinch. It hit the tongue like ocean water, heavy, deliberate. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the mug for a moment, then set it down and walked back out to the welding bay. The room stayed quiet behind him, but not empty. Tanner leaned back in his chair, the heel of one boot propped against the vending machine. He didn't say a word, but he smiled wide. The next day, Jonas's lunchbox went missing. It wasn't forgotten. He'd placed it on the top shelf like always, between the box marked Mira and a brown paper bag with duct tape that belonged to Wiley. At lunch it was gone, just gone. No wrapper in the trash, no note, no cleanup. When Jonas quietly asked around, the responses came in shrugs and glances that fell short of his eyes. Nobody saw anything. Nobody knew. But Tanner was whistling an old tune that no one could name. Same time, same place, and just loud enough to be noticed. Later that week, Jonas returned from a maintenance check and found a paper towel tucked into the vent on his locker. It wasn't crumpled. It was folded tight, squared like a note passed in high school. Inside, written in red grease pencil, were 3 words: wrong side, Creed. That was the day Tanner spat near his boots. It wasn't an accident. Tanner had just finished a protein bar, walked over like he'd forgotten something, leaned against the locker beside Jonas's, and spit clean on the tile below. Not at Jonas, not close enough to be called assault, but close enough to be a statement. Wrong side of town, he muttered, not looking up. The words weren't shouted, just dropped, like an old habit. No one laughed. But no one stopped him either. Rochelle was out that day, called away for a vendor audit. Clay had already clocked out early. The only manager left on the floor was Daryl, who ran quality assurance and liked to stay far from anything labeled personnel. Jonas bent down, wiped the floor with a rag from his pocket, and walked away. It was the silence that started to hum louder after that. In the break room, eyes didn't meet the same. Conversations ended when Jonas entered. Tools that used to be shared were now kept in private drawers. Nothing direct, just isolation, sharp and sterile. The hum of hostility had started low, like the hum of a fluorescent light, just before it burns out. Back in the testing bay, Shaq was busy with the new hydraulic prototype, an experimental model meant to lift twice the standard weight with less strain. He was hands-on, arms deep in schematics and tension sensors. The engineers from Atlanta were in that week, and between safety sign-offs and torque benchmarks, he didn't notice the shift in air outside the lab. But the walls did. The factory, for all its noise and motion, was a place that remembered things. Graffiti carved lightly into locker paint, mud tracks across the loading dock floor, scuff marks from boots that lingered too long near lockers. They didn't belong to. Mira started noticing how Tanner's team always took their breaks 15 minutes after Jonas's shift began. Never with him. Always after. Wiley noticed the vent above the welding bench blowing cold air only over Jonas's station. Leon started to wonder how Jonas's toolbox ended up getting accidentally relocated to the back storage shelf twice in a week. And Jonas? He just kept working. Shaq didn't hear about the spitting. Or the note. Not then. He was in the center bay watching the new lift strain, under pressure, clipboard in hand. But something had already started bothering him. Dallas Trent, the janitor, passed him that day near the loading dock. Dallas never said much beyond morning, or need a cleanup in Bay 3. But he paused just long enough to nod toward the break room. Then muttered, "Check the cameras if you care who's got manners these days." Shaq didn't ask what he meant. He just watched him walk away. That evening, Shaq stayed late, under the pretense of calibrating torque sensors. In truth, he walked the break room. He opened the mini fridge, took inventory of the names scratched into the microwave door, read the shift logs posted on the board. It was the stillness he focused on. How different the room felt now. Less shared space, more quiet corners. On a clipboard by the coffee machine, someone had drawn a cartoon tractor with sagging tires and a note beneath it. Built like Creed's career. It wasn't signed, it wasn't fresh ink, but it hadn't been cleaned either. That was the thing about these kinds of attacks. They didn't need fists, just the confidence that no one would interfere. Shaq took a photo of the clipboard, didn't remove it, didn't report it. He just walked back to his office, sat down, and thought. The next morning, Mira caught Jonas checking the vending machine, like he was looking for something more than food. She offered him a banana from her lunch. He declined with a tired smile. Later, when he opened his locker, he found his old lunchbox inside. Same spot, same latch. But inside was nothing but a dead AA battery and a folded napkin. No note this time. No threat. Just the message behind the message. "We can reach you." Still, Jonas didn't flinch. He just took the lunchbox, folded the napkin, and put it in his back pocket like it meant nothing at all. That was the last week he used the break room. Instead, he ate standing by the air compressor in Bay 3, or by the fence facing the test field, far from walls, far from stairs. Shaq noticed, and he didn't ask questions, not yet, but he started walking to Bay 3 more, asking Mira to keep a second eye on the cameras. And Dallas? He kept cleaning, but now when he passed Jonas's station, he swept slower, like a man who wanted to be nearby, just in case. The factory didn't say a word, but the silence was now loud enough that Shaq could hear it. He just needed to know where it was coming from. Jonas Creed had spent the better part of his adult life making broken things work again. Tractors, pulleys, old carburetors with cracked gaskets and rusted bolts. He knew what a jammed gear felt like, could smell oil going bad before the sensors did. So when the gear under the Bay 6 harvester snapped mid-test and fingers started pointing his way, he didn't look surprised, just tired. It wasn't his gear, wasn't his machine, and the logbook confirmed he hadn't signed in that day. But it didn't matter. Not really. The next morning, his name came up during the safety review. An anonymous note placed in the HR Dropbox read, "Jonas bypasses inspections, could be high risk." There was no signature, no date, no detail, just enough to launch a formal file. Rochelle called it a routine check, a box to tick. "We've had to log it," she said, eyes flicking across the page too quickly. "Standard procedure." Jonas nodded, said nothing. By Thursday, another form was added to the file. This one citing a missed shift from 3 weeks back. Except he hadn't missed it. He'd clocked in, worked overtime, and even helped Mira lift an entire shipment into storage after hours. She remembered. The clock remembered. But the system showed his badge hadn't scanned in until 3 hours late. Shaq was in the West Bay when he heard. One of the junior managers mentioned it, in passing. HR's doing a sweep on Creed, something about falsified hours. The phrase hit Shaq like cold steel on the back of the neck. He left mid-demo and walked straight to Rochelle's office. "Let me see the file," he said, voice even. Rochelle hesitated, but opened the drawer. She pulled out a slim folder. Too slim, 2 pages, and a sticky note. Shaq flipped through it. Slow. "Where's the incident log? Supervisor statements?" "That's all we got," she said carefully. "It's still being compiled. You launch an internal review on a man who's never had a safety flag and can fix a water pump blindfolded, based on one unsigned note and a glitched timestamp." Rochelle didn't answer, just lowered her eyes. Shaq left without another word, but the wheels in his head had started turning. Not fast, not reactive, just methodical. He started talking to people. Not officially, not as the owner, just as Shaq. He caught Mira near the loading dock. Asked about the shift Jonas supposedly missed. She rolled her eyes. "He didn't miss it. He lifted a 20-pound box off my foot that day. I remember it clear." He asked Leon about the gear that failed in Bay 6. "Jonas didn't touch that rig," Leon said flatly. "That machine was last adjusted by Clay's boy, Rick. I signed the work log myself." Shaq nodded, made mental notes, said nothing more. But he kept digging. It wasn't long before he noticed a pattern. The anonymous complaints? All targeted, all vague, mostly against employees hired through Shaq's Second Chance program. Men and women with rough resumes but spotless work ethics. Folks who didn't look or talk like Tanner's crowd. People who carried their pasts quietly, worked harder than most, and didn't cause trouble. Now one by one they were being flagged. Jonas was just the latest. That week Shaq started staying later, walking the factory floors after sunset, clipboard in hand, asking routine questions about airflow, maintenance logs, software errors. But what he was really doing was watching the patterns, who lingered after hours, who stayed clustered in corners when they thought no one was looking, who adjusted the badge scanners, and who had access to the digital logbooks. On Friday, Shaq found Dallas cleaning near the Bay 4 entrance. The janitor's cart was stacked with solvent and sawdust. But Shaq knew better. Dallas always swept where the noise wasn't, where the truth tended to settle. "Dallas," Shaq said low. Dallas didn't look up. Even in boss. "You seen anything strange this week?" The man kept mopping for a few seconds, then said define strange. "Unfamiliar faces in familiar places. New hands with old habits." Dallas stopped, leaned on his mop. "I seen Tanner in the server room, Monday. Said he was looking for a lost report. Never seen him with a report before." Shaq nodded. "You logged that?"
Nope. Just watched.
That night, Shaq reviewed the camera logs himself. The footage had gaps. 4 minutes here, 6 there. Never enough to raise alarms. Just enough to hide a locker search, a workbench shuffle, a misplaced tool. Small axe, almost invisible. But Jonas wasn't the only target. Shaq counted 6 other names, all from his original hiring wave. And then he found it. In the security archive, a single file had been renamed, not deleted. Timestamped at 10:43 a.m., 2 weeks prior. The footage showed Jonas working under a hoist rig while a figure unidentified switched out a torque gauge on the neighboring bench. Shaq zoomed in, couldn't see the face, but the walk, the height, it was either Clay or Tanner. Probably Tanner. He copied the clip. Saved it twice. The next morning, he walked the floor like nothing had changed. Greeted the crew, tasted the coffee, walked by Jonas and nodded. But inside, the math was done. Someone was setting fires in the dark, then blaming the man holding the extinguisher. Shaq understood something then. Racism didn't always march down the middle of the road, carrying torches. Sometimes it took notes in boardrooms. Sometimes it misfiled reports. Sometimes it put salt in coffee, or twisted badge logs, just enough to make a good man look like a liability. They wanted Jonas to quit. That much was clear. But Jonas wasn't built to fold. And Shaq wasn't built to look away. He didn't go public. Not yet. He wanted the rod exposed, not just removed. One wrong move, and they'd close ranks, spin it as misunderstanding or miscommunication. He needed the pattern, the motive, the proof. And so, for the first time since opening the factory, Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq, the face on the wall, the boss in boots, shifted his focus from building machines to breaking lies, one conversation at a time. Tuesday afternoon started like any other. Gravel crunching under truck tires, gears humming in the chassis line, and the ever-present rhythm of the floor metal on metal, sparks from welders, fans whirring. The heat was manageable, the morale mid-range. If anyone felt tension in the air, they didn't say so, the kind of day that pretended to be normal until it wasn't. At exactly 2:17 p.m., the lights flickered. Once, twice, then out. A low, rising whine came from the back generators, before silence swallowed the factory. 17 minutes. That's how long everything stayed dark. Emergency power kicked on only the bare minimum. Exit lights, a few ventilation fans, and the small red LEDs blinking on backup servers. The machines stopped, the forklifts idled. Men stood in place, unsure whether to laugh it off or clock out early. When the lights came back on, something was wrong. It started as a whisper in Bay 3, then a rush of boots across concrete. Someone had found Jonas Creed behind the hydraulic lift cage, slumped, dazed, bleeding at the palms like he'd tried to claw his way through something sharp. His face was pale. His shirt stuck to his back with sweat, and both his locker keys were missing. The first to reach him was Leon. He knelt, checked Jonas's pulse, then shouted for Rochelle. A crowd formed fast, Clay pushing his way to the front, Mira looking panicked, and Tanner standing off to the side, arms folded, face unreadable. Bay 3's storage cage has no lock from the inside, someone muttered. Then how the hell was he trapped in there? No one answered. Jonas was helped up, offered water, but he said very little, just shook his head and muttered, "Didn't see who it was, dark." "I didn't. It was just dark." His voice cracked, not from fear but disbelief, like a man trying to process how far decency could slip. Rochelle called an emergency meeting. 10 minutes later, the floor crew stood in the break room, tight-lipped and wide-eyed. Shaq arrived last. He didn't speak right away, just leaned against the back wall, arms folded, jaw set. Rochelle took the lead. "This is now a workplace incident. Under review. Jonas was found injured in a restricted area. We're investigating the cause. Until then, Bay 3 is off limits." Someone asked about the cameras. Another said, "Just pull the feed." A tech from the server room stepped forward, nervous. We lost all internal camera footage between 2:16 and 2:34. Power surge corrupted the drives. Whole sections blank." Shaq's eyes didn't blink. He knew a coincidence when he saw one. And this wasn't it. Dallas Trent stood at the edge of the group, mop in hand, face unreadable. Shaq's eyes locked with his. After the crowd dispersed, Shaq caught up to Dallas near the custodial closet. "Walk with me," he said, without raising his voice. Dallas followed, silent. They moved past the equipment bay and out toward the loading dock, where the noise thinned and the air felt cooler. Shaq leaned against the railing, stared out toward the tree line, then asked, "You were sweeping near Bay 3 before the power cut?" Dallas didn't answer right away. Then, "I don't sweep what's already clean, boss." Shaq turned toward him. "Steady. You record anything?" Dallas didn't confirm but didn't deny. He reached into the canvas pouch on his cart and pulled out a phone, older model. Cracked screen, duct tape on the corner. He handed it over. Shaq took it slowly. The video was shaky, but clear enough. Shot through the mesh of the maintenance shelf, it showed 3 men entering Bay 3 during the power dip. Flashlights flickering. One stood at the control panel. The other 2 moved toward the cage. You couldn't see Jonas yet, but the sound was there. Footsteps shuffling, the metallic clang of the cage locking, then voices. "Let's see how the old man handles quiet time." Then a laugh. Quick, ugly, followed by someone muttering, "You sure the boss ain't watching?" "No cameras." "We checked." Shaq stopped the video. Rewound. Watched it again. The faces weren't visible. But voices? Voices carried weight. Voices left fingerprints. He handed the phone back. "Keep this. Don't show it to anyone." "Not yet." Dallas gave a single nod. "I don't sweep what ain't ready." Shaq walked off slow, hands in his pockets, eyes far away. He didn't explode. Didn't call a second meeting. Didn't accuse or expose. Because Shaq had learned the hard way. Justice done too fast often leaves the real rot behind. And what he needed now wasn't noise. It was leverage. The next day, Jonas didn't come in. Mira said she called, and he answered, but said little. Sounded like someone who don't know whether he's standing on solid ground anymore. By noon, the rumor mill was in full swing. He wandered into a restricted bay, said one worker. Bet he tripped something. Maybe he was hiding out, avoiding work. I heard he was on something, eyes all glassy when they found him. Shaq heard every word, but responded to none. He kept his presence low, his questions casual. How had the surge happened? Why had only one section lost power? Why were maintenance logs missing timestamps for the prior 48 hours? He quietly met with Rochelle that evening, presented no evidence, just observations. Suggested the need for a silent audit, off the record. If we do this wrong, he told her, we'll only give him room to twist it into something clean. She looked unsure. You think this was planned? I think Jonas wasn't the first, just the one who didn't break right. Rochelle nodded. Quiet. Then she added, we'll need proof. We'll get it, Shaq said. But I'm gonna need more eyes than mine. Dallas wasn't the only one Shaq called that week. He quietly looped in 2 old heads from his veteran hires, Bo and Trenton, both loyal, both discreet. Start watching, he told them. Listen for what don't sound right. By Friday, Bay 3 was back online. Jonas returned the following Monday. His hands still bandaged, his walk slower, but his eyes sharper, like a man who'd seen something too close and lived to learn from it. He didn't talk about what happened, didn't mention the lock or the dark. He just picked up his tools and returned to work. But something had shifted in him, and the factory moved on. But the air had changed. Men started checking over their shoulders. Conversations shortened. Even Tanner seemed less loud. Not because he was scared, because he could feel it. Shaq was watching, and he was no longer just smiling. Something was building now. Not noise. Not conflict. Pressure. The kind that made steel bend. It was the 3rd Wednesday of the month, when they held the company town hall, a routine gathering meant for updates, recognition, and the occasional birthday sheet cake in the break room. Folks came expecting the usual. Shaq at the front, speaking plain and warm, cracking a line or two before shifting into serious talk. But that day the room was heavier. Something had been tightening in the factory walls for weeks. Eyes weren't meeting the way they used to. Greetings felt rehearsed, clipped. Even the coffee tasted burnt. Everyone gathered early, some curious, others anxious. Tanner and Clay's crew lined the back wall, arms crossed, smirks carved into their faces, like they'd already won something. Mira sat up front, flanked by Wiley and Rochelle, who looked like she'd been rewriting the same sentence on her clipboard for an hour. One seat near the middle stayed empty. Jonas. At exactly 9:10 a.m., Shaq entered through the west doors. No smile, no folder in hand. Just Shaq, broad and slow in movement, like a freight train approaching with no whistle. He walked to the front, didn't step onto the platform, just stopped, scanned the room once. His eyes rested on the back row. Tanner shifted in his stance. Silence took over. Someone coughed, but no one filled the space. Shaq looked at the people who built his dream. The welders with burn marks on their sleeves, the janitors with worn soles, the managers with furrowed brows. He looked at them all like he could see every file, every shift, every lie. And then he walked out. No speech, no gesture, not even a word. That silence? Louder than anything the factory had ever heard. By noon, rumors bloomed like weeds. Shaq's mad. Nah, Shaq's planning something. Maybe he's stepping down. Maybe he already has. The absence of sound became its own language. Every conversation carried weight. Every joke landed flat. Even the machine seemed to hiss softer. Then Dallas didn't show up. No mop bucket, no whistle from the East Hall. Just gone. Word spread fast. Some said he was on sick leave. Others whispered he'd been transferred. No one could prove anything, and no one dared ask too loud. The same week, Jonas's locker was emptied. Name tag gone. Toolbox missing. Rochelle said he'd taken a leave of absence. No details, just a line in an email. Jonas Creed will be off-site until further notice. There was no send-off, no goodbyes, just silence. Again. In their place came new bodies. Unfamiliar names. Hired fast, trained faster. They moved in groups, mostly at night. Tanner's crew now ran the second shift. which crept longer each day. Security posts were quietly reassigned. Day 3 was suddenly under restricted hours for routine system updates. Leon noticed first. The air smelled different, like something acrid clinging to the vents. Wiley noticed that some equipment never got logged back into the system. Mira found that HR now required badge verification just to use the copier. Everyone felt it. The rules weren't being rewritten. They were being replaced quietly, efficiently, and without question. And still, Shaq said nothing. He showed up every morning, walked the perimeter, stopped at the break room, poured coffee, and stood at the window watching the sunrise like it might spell out a message in the light. But he never raised his voice, never made an announcement, never mentioned Jonas, Dallas, or the meeting that had gone silent. He just watched. One night, Rochelle found him in the server room, eyes on the monitors. He wasn't watching the floor feeds. He was watching old footage, timestamped weeks back. She didn't ask what he was looking for. She just stood in the doorway, waiting. Finally, he said, "You ever hear a building hold its breath?" She hesitated. "No." He nodded once. "This one is." After she left, he kept watching. Not the men. The patterns. Time cards that overlapped without reason. Footsteps that echoed louder when no one should have been walking. A fire drill report with 3 signatures that didn't match employee IDs. Shaq wasn't a digital guy by nature, but he knew blueprints, and what was unfolding wasn't random. It was structured, like someone had drawn out exactly how to scrub a man from a place without leaving blood. He called Bo the next morning, told him to look into vendor supply logs. Trenton was sent to cross-check payroll timestamps against machine logs. Rochelle, though skeptical, began combing through HR referrals from the past 6 months, specifically the new hires connected to Tanner and Clay. What they found wasn't explosive, but it was enough. Referrals came from a subcontractor in Monroe County, known for accelerated placements. Several hires had incomplete background checks. At least 2 had been flagged for misconduct in previous workplaces, but nothing that stuck, nothing official. Still, the air got colder, wordlessly, like the factory had developed a second personality, one that moved at night, operated in silence, and tolerated no resistance. The old crew felt it. Mira started eating lunch outside. Wiley began locking his tools. Leon, once the most talkative, grew quiet. The men and women who made O'Neill Steel what it was were now walking with shoulders tighter, steps lighter, like something hunted was loose in the building.
And Shaq?
He just kept watching. Listen, because the kind of injustice they were up against didn't explode. It infected. It waited. It planted seeds in empty lockers and erased names off the schedule. It turned decent folks into ghosts. But Shaq had grown up around shadows. He'd learned long ago that silence was a choice. But watching was survival. And now he was watching everything. Every glitch, every smirk, every coincidence that didn't line up. He walked slower these days. Not because he was tired. Because every step mattered. Every hallway had something to say if you gave it time. He stopped using the break room. Started keeping his own records. And when he passed the empty locker where Jonas's name used to be, he didn't stop. Just ran one hand across the door as he walked by. Fingers dragging along the cold metal like it still carried a heartbeat. Because Shaq knew what they didn't.
The factory hadn't gone quiet.
It was waiting. It came in a plain manila envelope. Hand-delivered. No stamp, no return address. Just sitting there on Shaq's desk when he stepped into his office at 6:12 a.m. It was light, but packed. The kind of thing that didn't make noise but still changed everything once opened. Shaq stared at it for a full minute before pulling the flap. Inside was a USB drive, wrapped in electrical tape. 3 floor schematics with timestamps circled in red. And one photo grainy, tilted, clearly from a low-grade phone. But even in the blur, Shaq saw it. Tanner, Clay, a third man, maybe Rick, all walking shoulder to shoulder with Jonas, who looked small between them. The timestamp in the corner matched the afternoon of the outage, the day Jonas was found locked in Bath. Shaq sat down, not hard but with weight, like he was trying to ground himself before the shift started. He plugged the USB into his personal laptop, not the factory network, and opened the folders. Time logs, security badge scans, camera entry data, all cross-referenced. Whoever sent this knew the internal system better than some of his managers. One folder labeled Manual Overrides mapped out when Tanner's crew accessed restricted consoles in the electrical room. Another, Quiet Bays, Showed 2 weeks' worth of discrepancies, parts signed out, never returned. Machines repaired with no technician logs. Shaq leaned back. Exhaled. He didn't call didn't call Rochelle, didn't say a word to the floor crew. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 5 years. The line clicked. Then a voice polished warm, with an edge like old silver.
Well,
I thought you only called me when someone died or got baptized. Miss Corin, he said. Need to talk. When and where? Same porch. Today. The porch hadn't changed. White railings, rocking chair faded gray, and a ceramic dog statue she swore kept evil spirits out. Miss Corinne met him with a kiss on the cheek, and a glass of sweet tea that would melt enamel. Sit, she said, already reading him. You ain't here for lemonade and gossip. Shaq handed her the folder and the USB. Didn't speak until she'd scanned the maps and opened the files on her own laptop. When she looked up, her mouth was set hard. You think this about color? Shaq's eyes didn't flinch. No. Good. I know it is. Miss Corinne had once been a federal circuit judge, the kind that didn't wear her robes like armor, but like a warning. She had a sharp tongue, a sharper mind, and a memory built like a courtroom transcript. She retired 10 years ago, after burying 3 crooked zoning boards and 2 labor racketeers. She didn't take cases anymore. But this wasn't a case.
This was family.
She tapped a section on the floor map. Here. This override panel? They used it to kill the camera feed? Looks like it. They were smart. Not careful, but smart. Shaq nodded. That's the problem. Corinne flipped through the timestamp logs, eyes flicking. How many of these names are protected hires? 6. Including Jonas. She grunted. All second chance hires? Everyone. She leaned back, interlaced her fingers. You need 2 things. Documentation and distance. I got the first. You don't have the second. I can get it. She studied him, hard. You built that factory with your name, your face. You try to burn 'em, they'll say you set the fire. Shaq smiled, dry. That's why I need a different flame. Corinne sipped her tea. We'll build the case. Slow, invisible. Then we cut their roots. Over the next week, Shaq handed off control of all disciplinary reviews to a third-party mediator, officially for employee trust building. Unofficially, it was a way to prevent Tanner's crew from running defense. Corinne recommended Greer and Stanton, a firm that specialized in workplace misconduct and had no local ties. They reviewed everything without telling the factory they'd begun. Meanwhile, Trenton and Bo dug deeper. One vendor had been flagged for sending incomplete mechanical parts. Parts signed off by Clay. Mira started scanning in all tool orders twice, logging timestamps independently. Wiley rewired the Bay 3 camera so it stored backups offline, just in case. They weren't soldiers, just builders. But now they were building something else, a trap. Tanner didn't change his routine. He still swaggered through the halls like the floor owed him something. Still chuckled too loud in the break room. But the laughter didn't carry the same weight. Folks had started watching, quietly, like they were waiting for a drop they could feel coming. Shaq remained publicly quiet. No meetings, no accusations, no standoffs. But behind the scenes he passed Corinne weekly packets, log files, witness notes, cross-referenced entries. She built the web, name by name, move by move. Then came the twist. A new folder appeared in Shaq's inbox. Anonymously sent, labeled proof of intent. Inside were text messages between Clay and Rick, bragging, plotting, laughing about Jonas's hands bleeding, calling it fun. One even read, bet the boss still thinks this place is clean. Shaq didn't forward it to HR. He printed it, held it in his hand for 2 full minutes. Then he picked up his phone and called Corinne. She answered on the second ring. I was wondering when the final nail would show up. I got it, he said. Time to hammer it in, she replied. They didn't make arrests. Not yet. Corinne insisted on a full labor board filing, followed by a press briefing and a public notice to the subcontractor company that had funneled in the toxic hires, not to destroy careers, but to expose system. The rot wasn't just in the crew, it was in the pipes feeding them. By the time the whistleblower's map made its quiet debut, failed through an employment justice nonprofit, shielded from retaliation, Shaq had already laid the groundwork for a factory-wide audit, complete with anonymous testimony and off-site compliance interviews. Tanner never saw it coming. Clay resigned 2 days before the report dropped. Rick disappeared from the shift roster without explanation. The silence in the factory changed. Not gone, but softer. Like fear had been replaced by something else. Anticipation. Shaq didn't speak publicly. Not yet. He knew better than to shout truth at a wall that hadn't finished cracking. But he'd lit the match. And now the fire was coming. They didn't come all at once. That would have made too much noise. The first clipboard showed up on a Tuesday, held by a woman in an OSHA vest, with tight braids and mirrored glasses. She asked for fire drill reports, access logs, ventilation permits. Shaq personally walked her through every file cabinet in the compliance room. On Wednesday, a pair of suits walked through the south entrance. IRS auditors. Silent, methodical, surgical. They didn't smile. Didn't blink much. Just requested vendor invoices, subcontractor rosters, and the last 6 months of tax submissions. Rochelle almost dropped her pen when she saw them. Shaq met them at the gate with a handshake and 3 prepared binders. By Thursday, the labor board arrived. Not one rep, but a team. Mixed backgrounds. Serious expressions. Not there for the coffee. They split into pairs and fanned out like they'd been planning this visit for weeks, which quietly they had. The factory didn't know what hit it. Clay had already resigned. Tanner walked in that morning, cocky and loud. Then left 2 hours later in silence, after being handed a suspension letter and an official notice of investigation. Rick was nowhere to be found. His badge was still active, but his locker was cleaned out. Word was he had family in Mississippi and a car that could outrun any subpoena. By Friday, 3 of the new hires were removed from the rotation, and a mandatory ethics training was issued, company-wide. Mira didn't hide her smirk when she signed the attendance sheet. Shaq never raised his voice. Never posted a memo. Never mentioned Jonas. But Jonas was back. He didn't make an entrance. No locker decorations. No welcome back party. He just walked through the east gate, toolbox in hand, nodding once to the security guard. Same boots. Same flannel. But something quieter in his eyes, like someone who'd come back not for revenge, but because dignity has a way of returning when it's defended. He wasn't reassigned to Bay 3. Shaq put him in diagnostics, where the best techs worked the most delicate machines. Not as reward, as statement. That Monday, Shaq called for a press briefing. Not a town hall. Not a speech to the crew. A full-blown, on-camera recorded press briefing. First one in factory history. The media gathered near the West Yard, makeshift podium set up under the aluminum awning, flanked by 2 tractors, and the smell of welding sparks in the distance. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled. They were ready for scandal. For names. For a story with villains and lawsuit. What they got was something else. Shaq stepped to the mic wearing a blue work shirt with no name patch. Sleeves rolled. No notes. Just his presence. Steady. Grounded. Deeply still. I built this factory, he said. Not for headlines. Not for profits. I built it because some people believe in fixing engines. I believe in fixing people. The crowd stilled. We've had visitors this week. Inspectors, auditors, federal agents. And I welcomed every single one of them. Because if you build something strong, you don't fear people looking at the bolts. He paused. Not for effect, just to breathe. See, there are men who build things, and there are men who break them. Some break with hammers, others with whispers, rumors, files gone missing, lies said soft and passed along like coffee. I've seen both kinds. Behind the cameras, Mira crossed her arms. Bo stood with Trenton near the bay doors. Jonas leaned against the side of a steel trailer, half in shadow, half in sun. Some folks say racism only lives loud, that it marches, that it burns crosses, or wears hoods. But I've learned sometimes it wears work boots, sometimes it carries clipboards, sometimes it signs time cards, and still forgets your name. A few pens stopped writing. I'm not here to name names, Shaq continued. That ain't justice. Justice don't need a stage. It just needs to stand. Quietly, firmly, without apology. He looked into the crowd, and the words slowed. You ever notice how easy it is to silence a man who speaks too little? Easy to call him lazy, unqualified, aggressive, even, when all he did was show up and work. Easy to twist silence into guilt. He looked toward the line of tractors, lifted his chin just a little. But I've also learned, when giants go quiet, it ain't fear, it's calculation, it's patience, it's knowing the long game. There was a pause so complete, the wind moving through the grass behind the shed seemed loud. Legacy, Shaq said, ain't what you leave in the bank. It's what you leave in people, in the soil, in the stories folks tell when you ain't in the room. A final beat. Then he leaned forward, resting both hands on the podium. I want this factory to be more than a place to earn. I want it to be a place that never unlearns what respect looks like. He stepped back. No mention of Jonas, no condemnation of Tanner or Clay, just the truth laid bare, without shouting. After the cameras turned off, reporters crowded around, asking questions he didn't answer. He just shook hands, walked the perimeter, and disappeared back into diagnostics. That afternoon, the factory floor sounded louder, but better. Hammers struck clean, lifts groaned back to life. Someone played an old blues track on the intercom. No one stopped it. Jonas worked in silence, but with ease. Mira passed him a second thermos of coffee at noon. Wiley tightened the rigging on Bay 2 without being asked. The small things were returning, signs of safety, of rebuilding. In the break room, the clipboard with the old cartoon about Jonas had been replaced. This one held a quote written in black marker. A man's worth ain't in his noise. It's in what stays standing after the noise is gone. No one admitted who wrote it. Shaq passed by it, later that day, didn't say anything. Just looked at it for a long second, then went back to work. Outside, the press called it a reckoning. Inside, it felt more like balance. Not because someone was punished, but because someone was finally heard. It was one of Shaq's finest, an O'Neill XL Track 950. Built strong, wired smart, designed for long hauls and heavy plows. But that morning, it wouldn't move. Its driver, a logistics runner from Macon, leaned against the rear wheel, phone in hand, no signal in sight. He kicked the tire once, half out of frustration, half out of habit. Then, in the distance, the rumble of a pickup. Not fast, not flashy, just steady. A silver 99 F-150 with faded paint and mud-dried hubcaps rolled up and eased to a stop. Driver door opened. Out stepped a man in a flannel shirt and boots worn so smooth they looked like river stones. He didn't say anything at first, just tipped his cap, walked over to the hood, and crouched without invitation. "Morning," the stranded driver said. "Morning," the man replied, low and easy. "Track won't start, won't even cough." The man didn't ask for tools. He pulled a multi-wrench from his back pocket like it was part of his hand, slid under the machine with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Sparks clicked, metal tapped, wires were gently nudged back into place. The driver squinted. "You, work with O'Neill?" The man slid back out, wiped his hands on a rag. "Used to." He gave the ignition a gentle thump, then stepped back. "Try it now." The driver climbed in, turned the key. The engine coughed once, then roared back to life, as if it had never quit. "Man," the driver said, stepping out. "You are a lifesaver." The man gave a half smile. "I just know how she was put together." It was only then, looking closer in the daylight, that the driver realized who he was speaking to. The photo had hung in the factory for years. A quiet honor, rarely discussed, but never taken down. "Wait," the driver said. You're Jonas Creed." Jonas nodded once. "I thought you didn't. They say you left factory. I figured you were..." The sentence broke before it could reach anywhere decent. "I'm back where I started," Jonas said, glancing at the fields beyond the tree line. "My land wasn't much, but it's mine again." "How'd you pull that off?" "Piece by piece. Same way you build a tractor." The driver stepped back, looked at the revived engine, then back at Jonas. "You still bitter about what happened back there?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He took off his cap, let the breeze touch his forehead, then looked at the soil. "You know," he said slowly, "hate don't make things grow." The driver let the words sit. No reply came to mind. None was needed. Jonas looked over the field, like a man surveying a memory, brought back to life. The drought had stripped it once, then the bills, then the grief. But now the fences were upright. A scarecrow stood in the distance, hat tilted like it was nodding. Rows of early corn poked through the dirt. "I had to lose the land to learn how to rebuild it," Jonas said. "Funny how life works." The driver leaned on the tractor. "Shaq still running the factory?" Jonas smiled, not wide but sure. "Yeah, and he's running it even quieter now." "Quiet?" "He's the kind of man who don't speak unless the words matter. Lot of folks mistake that for weakness. But I've seen what it looks like when he's listening." The driver nodded. "People forget how loud silence can be." Jonas chuckled. and how clear it speaks. He stepped back toward his truck, folding the rag into his back pocket. You should be good now. But if it stalls again, check the coolant feed. That model's got a temper when it runs hot. Will do, the driver said. I owe you.
Jonas shook his head. You owe the folks who built it right the first time.
They shook hands, collars, palms. Honest grip. Then Jonas climbed into the pickup, gave one soft honk as he drove off toward the trees. Back at the factory, Shaq stood in diagnostics, watching a pressure test level out. Wiley was laughing in Bay 2. Mira hummed while typing reports. Bo was fixing the intercom wire Dallas had once spliced with chewing gum. The place wasn't perfect, but it had rhythm again. Shaq turned to the window, where the sun had just started to drop, laying long shadows across the workyard. He didn't know about the roadside tractor yet, but somehow, deep in his bones, he smiled. Not because the work was done, but because something good had grown where they tried to bury the roots. The air inside the main testing bay was still, the kind of stillness that came only after storms, not the kind that roared through with lightning and fire, but the quieter ones that hollowed out the sky and left you staring at what remained. The machines were silent. The sparks had cooled. Shaq stood alone in the center of the floor, surrounded by the tools, the blueprints, and the echoes of everything he had built. No audience, no press, just him, the dust and the weight of a story that needed finishing. He didn't need a microphone. Not today. He looked into the camera, not for attention, but for memory. Because there comes a point where you don't tell a story to be heard. You tell it so the silence doesn't win. You can build machines, he said slowly. Or you can build men, but you can't build both, not if you forget to listen. His voice didn't rise. It wasn't preaching. It was reflection, low, solid, deliberate. When I started this factory, I thought giving folks a paycheck and a clean uniform would be enough, that a fresh start meant forgetting the dirt behind you. I was wrong. He paused, walking slowly past the central lift. His boots echoed against the concrete. This place was meant to be a second chance. Not just for the ones who messed up, but for the ones who were never given a first. He stopped at the far side of the room, where the wall was lined with old photos, some of the first hires, smiling crookedly in their new work shirts, standing in front of the original XL track frame with grease still on their hands. Jonas was in one of those shots. So was Bo, and Mira, holding a clipboard bigger than her arm. Shaq reached out, touching the edge of the photo without lifting it. But you learn real quick that second chances don't mean much when folks carry the first chance in their back pocket, waving it around like proof they belong here more than you do. He turned back toward the camera. Racism ain't always loud. It don't always come in slurs and fists and flags. Sometimes it walks real quiet. Files fake reports, moves security posts, deletes video feeds, changes the temperature in one bay but not the other. Sometimes it knows the handbook better than the heart. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in truth. I've seen men try to erase other men, without ever touching them. Make them disappear with silence, with paperwork, with suspicion dressed up as concern. I watched it happen to Jonas. I watched it start with whispers, with spit near a locker, with a lunch gone missing. I watched it grow roots. He stepped forward, closer now. And I'll tell you something I've come to believe. Standing tall don't always mean talking loud. Sometimes, the biggest man in the room is the one watching when nobody thinks he is. Shaq paced a little, slow, like turning the memory over in his palms. I had two choices. I could come out swinging. Could have fired folks on the spot, shouted names from the rooftops. But that would have made it about revenge. And this was never about that. This was about structure. About making sure that when one man gets wronged, it don't get buried under paperwork and shame. That when one man gets cornered, the whole building shifts. He looked off to the side now, almost like he was speaking to someone just out of frame. My mama used to say, justice don't walk fast, but it don't forget its steps. So I made sure every step counted. The camera followed as he walked toward the open garage bay doors. Outside, the yard shimmered in the afternoon light. Tractors lined up in rows like steel shoulders. Birds circled above the silo. The hum of welding was back now, low and steady. Work had resumed, but it wasn't the same. Shaq leaned on the doorframe. I saw what hate tried to do here, and I watched what dignity did back. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. Everyone who'd been watching knew the roles played. The hands moved. The lies whispered. That was the point. Exposing the behavior without turning it into theater. Letting the truth do the talking. Jonas didn't fight back with fists. He didn't even raise his voice. He just kept showing up. That's what some folks don't understand. Showing up, that's a form of resistance too. And sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not leave. Shaq took a breath, deep and grounding. We lost some things along the way. Trust, time, a little faith. But we didn't lose the foundation. We rebuilt on it. He walked back toward the center of the bay, voice softer now. To those who tried to break this place, understand something. We weren't scared. We were watching. And now the world is watching you. He picked up a wrench from a nearby table, turning it in his hand. Legacy ain't about how many machines you build. It's about what those machines say when they run. If they run with pride, with honesty, with hands that were given a fair shot. The camera shifted, catching the small plaque on the wall. A quote etched into steel, "Where hands meet hope, a new engine starts." Shaq placed the wrench down, looked straight ahead. Folks ask me why I stayed quiet for so long. I wasn't quiet. I was choosing the right moment to speak. And this is that moment. He gave one small nod, like a final punctuation mark. So if you're watching this and wondering what you should do when you see injustice, watch first. Listen hard. Then move. With purpose. With truth. Without yelling if you don't need to. He stepped off frame. The last sound was the door rolling closed behind him. And just like that, Big Shaq walked out of the story the same way he walked into it. Solid. Still. Unshaken. Not every fight is loud. Not every hero wears a cape. And sometimes, justice looks like showing up, clocking in, and refusing to disappear. If this story struck something in you, keep watching, keep questioning, and never underestimate a man who chooses silence until it's time to speak. There's more where this came from, and every truth deserves its end.